Driving liberals crazy. 3 hours a day, every day. The Sean Hannity Show is back on the air.
All right, 25 now till the top of the hour. 800-941-SEAN if you want to be a part of the program. So we have our friends of this program, Congressman Louie Gohmert of Texas and Duncan Hunter of California. So both of them traveled to Leavenworth Prison yesterday to meet with soldiers that are convicted of murder in combat zones. Now, we have highlighted many of these instances where these guys that are on a battlefield, and of course the handcuffs that were put on them and the rules of engagement insanity of the Obama years, and Clinton Lawrence's name comes to mind. I mean, this is a guy that takes over a platoon, and sure enough, the week before, 2 weeks prior to this incident that he sent them to Leavenworth, well, there was an attack on that platoon, and they lost the platoon leader, and they lost a bunch of other people because a bunch of guys, terrorists that were on motorcycles, they were basically suicide bombers on those motorcycles. So Clinton Lawrence finds himself taking over that very specific platoon, and lo and behold, the checkpoint is violated, and two guys on a motorcycle are coming right at the platoon. Now, he's got to make the split-second decision. Well, do I assume that they're not part of any terrorist organization? Can I assume that they're not going to do what happened 2 weeks ago? He made the decision to defend his platoon. I mean, it's amazing how people can second-guess guys that are in combat, from the comfort of their offices and their air-conditioned military courtrooms. It's ridiculous to me. And then, of course, other instances have taken place as well. Now, in the case of Clinton Lawrence, well, we later found out, they didn't have IEDs then, but we did find their DNA on IEDs after the fact. That case should be reopened immediately. Anyway, also joining Congressman Duncan Hunter and Louie Gohmert on this trip was Sergeant Derrick Miller. He's a military advisor to Congressional Justice for Warriors Caucus. And in 2011, Miller was convicted of murder, sentenced to life in prison for shooting and killing a Taliban operative who grabbed Derrick's gun during an interrogation. After having lost 8 years of his life at Leavenworth, he was finally paroled on May 20th. So my attitude is, okay, if we don't have the will to do it and fight a traditional war anymore, that's fine. But we better develop the next generation of weaponry so we can push buttons in Tampa, Florida, and beat back, like we beat back the caliphate in Syria, ISIS. Anyway, they all join us right now. Louie, good to talk to you. Duncan, good to talk to you. Sergeant, good to talk to you as well.
Well, Sean, thank you for having us on. But, of course, Duncan had fought over there for us. He had seen injustices occur, so he was already on this. But what got me onto this issue was you and Lauren and Linda, and I started hearing from y'all about folks that have been unfairly treated, and having sentenced people to prison before as a felony judge, I just can't stand the thought of the kind of injustices that we were hearing. And so that's what started this caucus, that concern Duncan and I had. And Derrick Miller that you mentioned, you outlined his case so well. But, when I testified before the parole board for Derrick, they said, well, he'd have to have a job. And I said, well, he's had 3 offers, and if he doesn't want those, I'll hire him at my office. And Derrick is working with us. He has been helping us zero in on cases of terrible injustice. But it comes back to you lighting a fire over this issue, and thank you so much for doing so.
Well, let me go to Sergeant Derrick Miller. Sergeant, you spent 8 years in prison, so you know very well what I'm talking about here. Is what I'm saying true? That during the Obama years, rules of engagement, you had handcuffs on you, and that you're not able, we're sending you to war, and then we're not allowing you to do your job?
You're absolutely correct, and that's the sentiment that is going on throughout the military. These soldiers are being asked to be in place in impossible situations where they're making split-second life or death decisions for themselves and their brothers and sisters in arms. And when they go into these courtrooms, there's just such misconduct with evidence not being disclosed, being tampered with, and unlawful command influence. And to find men up here on Capitol Hill who are just as adamant about defending the freedoms, the Constitution, and the soldiers themselves is amazing. And that's why I'm so grateful to Congressman Gohmert and Congressman Duncan Hunter for starting this caucus and making
And Congressman Hunter,
possible.
you served yourself. Is there anything I'm saying here that's wrong? Do you not agree with me that we give up on these wars, we politicize them, and then we have to ask, well, why are we asking our sons and daughters to fight them?
No, if you're going to go to war, we should go to war, and hell should have no fury like the American military going in and utterly destroying somebody if you want to mess with us. And then we should not stay there. We shouldn't try to help if the help is not wanted. But one of the bigger issues with what happened with Gallagher and Derrick and Clint Lawrence and Tom Hatley and these cases we're going to show to the President of the United States and say, hey, we believe in these guys, is the prosecutorial misconduct. The system in the military is completely rigged to go against the warfighter. One of these guys had nurses in his jury. So you're supposed to be judged by a jury of your peers. If I'm a military person, I don't want a stockbroker and a teacher and a stay-at-home mom looking at my combat case. I also don't want colonels that are nurses or dentists looking at my case either. I want to be judged by my peers, people that have been in the same situation that I had seen the same thing, had walked the same streets, and know what I went through. None of these guys are being judged like that. And in Eddie Gallagher's case, his lawyers told me if they didn't have Marines in that jury, he would have lost anyway, even with all the pressure.
Listen, I'm going to tell you something about the Gallagher case because I was following it. We talked about it. And I remember Bernie Kerrig was active in fighting for his defense. And I said, Bernie, look at how they're writing this up in the newspaper, that you've got 7 Navy SEALs turning on one guy. I said, I've never heard of that before. But when you get to the bottom of it, they never expected the other guy was going to say, no, I'm the one that actually did it. They could have actually figured that out ahead of time. But no, they have to put this guy in solitary confinement.
And if it weren't for President Trump, he would still probably be incarcerated. Such an outrage. And in addition to the people already mentioned, Duncan mentioned First Sergeant Hatley. I mean, this poor guy, he was going to give an Article 15 non-judicial punishment to a staff sergeant who didn't want it, but he had hit a lieutenant in the chest. This first sergeant was charged with 4 counts of murder based on what the staff sergeant said. There were never any bodies recovered. The CID went through the community trying to find if anybody was missing. Nobody was missing. There were no names, no bodies, no forensic evidence whatsoever, and yet he's already done, 11 years or so in prison for premeditated murder. It's an outrage. But as we've heard, though, President Obama on down made clear they wanted people punished so that we could look good to Karzai and others in Afghanistan, that we punished our soldiers and were really friendly to the Afghans. That's nuts.
Let me give another case, because I know what you guys are trying to do here, and that you want constructive changes to the Uniform Code of Military Justice. And I think Sergeant Miller is correct in that we ought to have those that actually know what the hell they're talking about and have lived in these situations, and having had made similar split-second decisions, I think they may be better peers than people in a comfortable office that has no knowledge of any real combat. But, look at the case of Officer Hatley. Army Master Sergeant, served nearly 11 years of a 25-year sentence at Leavenworth. He was convicted of killing 4 detainees in a war zone in Iraq during a routine patrol in 2007. And the Army Criminal Investigation Command did not find one shred of physical or forensic evidence to suggest that any men were missing, much less killed. There were no bodies, no brass, no evidence of any crime.
Yep.
Additionally, they conducted extensive interviews with the family members of the detained men who stated that no one from their family was missing. They conducted interviews with neighbors of surrounding areas. They stated no one from their neighborhood was missing. They interviewed the man who owned a farm where the bodies were allegedly disposed of, and he stated he had no knowledge of any killings or heard about anyone being killed. The only evidence was from compelled statements from a couple of soldiers who claimed that 4 men of Middle Eastern descent were killed. Okay? This guy served 20 years in the Army, with an otherwise outstanding and excellent record as a military.
Decorated for valor.
2 Bronze Stars, Army Commendation, Medal of Valor. I mean, a Ranger tab and much more. How do we do that to somebody?
John Hatley is the tip of the spear. He is exactly what you envision when you think of a U.S. Army soldier. And the fact that he was railroaded like this shows that the prosecution came in with a narrative, and they forced those younger soldiers, threatened them with the prosecution of life in prison. I just printed off an affidavit from one of the witnesses who said, I received a 25-year or 20-year agreement off paper to testify against John Hatley, and that is why I did what I did.
Yep.
It's scary.
It's scary.
The fact that they will push whatever narrative they need to get that win at the expense of the soldiers.
It's not about winning in this case. The only ones we should be concerned about winning over are the enemy. Anyway, I'm glad you all are putting this together. Sergeant, thank you. Congressman Gohmert, thank you. Congressman Hunter, thank you. And if we can help in any future endeavors to get innocent guys out of Leavenworth, let us know.
Always have. Thanks so much, Sean.
800-941-SEAN, toll-free telephone number.